back at it again. Sent off the ECU yesterday to Adaptronic on October 17th. So while the ECU is away, because I know it's going to take a while, I'm going to go ahead and tear down the engine, go through it again, and try to find out why I'm getting positive pressure into my coolant system. I'm assuming last time I rebuilt it, I had a seal move a little bit while I was bolting it together, and then it's allowing pressure from combustion and ignition into the coolant system and causing insane amounts of air in my coolant. It's pretty much the only thing that it can be besides cracked iron, which is very possible, but I'm hoping it's not, because I only have, I think, 3 more spare irons per, so I've got 3 front, 3 middle, and 3 rear, but I only have 1 extra rear for a Cosmo, because the winter mount's bolted to the side instead of the bottom like an FD. And while I'm in there, I might end up doing a little bit more porting to open up the intake just a little bit more, because I do know I have probably about 3 or 4 millimeters that I'm not using until it gets to the part where it's unsafe. I'm just really lucky that I ended up doing all this deleting of things that it doesn't need, because pulling this engine honestly doesn't take very long, so this should be a pretty short video, especially if I time-lapse it. I just have to take the upper intake manifold off, get the harness out of the way, unhook the ground cables, unbolt the transmission, motor mounts, and pretty much it's ready to come out. It's pretty easy. I'm actually not gonna time-lapse it, just because I don't know if anybody's watching this as like a instructional video on how to get an FD engine out or a Cosmo engine out, but just remember, if you're doing this, there's a lot more to the OEM harness and a lot more to the engine bay in a car that's not deleted. So, I mean, this pretty much tells you all the basics to get done. Just be really careful if you end up doing this not to break any wires, and remember where your vacuum hoses go, especially if it's the stock twin turbo system, because if you mess those up, it is not going to boost correctly and you're going to have serious issues. That actually ended up being the issue with hers. She had massive vacuum leaks because she has a 1992 and it had the original engine in it, so it had tons and tons of vacuum leaks, broken vacuum lines. So in the stock FD system, this is what's called the rat's nest. It has tons and tons of vacuum lines. They're very brittle. You have to be really careful with it. And you do have to pull the engine and transmission out of an FD together. Because if you don't, it's going to be a world of hurt trying to separate the engine and transmission, and especially putting it back together. It's going to be a pain in the butt to get it apart. I've tried to do it before. I've definitely been told that I shouldn't try to do it, but we didn't really have the option to get under the car. I mean, we did, but it wasn't going to be safe, kind of doing it under jack stands and try to lift the engine up at the same time with somebody under there. I don't really like doing sketchy stuff like that. Obviously, step 1 is going to be disconnecting the battery, getting all power away from the car and harness. I have done it before where I have tried to pull the engine and forgot about disconnecting the battery, and ended up where that positive terminal on the alternator is. It is positively charged, and with the way I have mine set up, I do have a circuit breaker, but it does damage stuff. You know, touching it to something and your circuit breaker malfunctions or something like that, it's just not worth it. So take the battery off first. I do just to kind of create some more room in the engine bay, not like I really need it, but I try to make it as easy as possible. I take my intercooler off, get all the piping out of the way, and then I disconnect the upper intake manifold from all the harness and things like that, get that out of the way, and that exposes the entire wiring harness for my car, because it's completely deleted and I don't have any of the extra stuff to make the twin turbos activate and all the extra solenoids and stuff. Well, as you can see, I did a little bit more than what I said I was going to do. I guess I just got carried away because it's so quick to take this thing apart. So, battery disconnected, alternator off, front ground wire off, coolant is drained out of the engine. Haven't drained the oil yet because I'm not going to open up the oil coolers. Got half the harness off, got the fuel rails unbolted from the block and upper intake manifold. And then I'll get those out of the way. But honestly, that's about all I've done so far. Got the coils disconnected just so if the wires get pulled on, it doesn't, bend the coil bracket that I made. I think that's about it for now. I'll catch up with you guys when I'm on to the next step. Okay, next step. So I'm going to go ahead and take the AN lines off of the fuel filter, only the one that goes to the rails, just because the fuel feed line to the filter is bolted to the frame, and it's not in the way or anything. It won't get pinched, it won't get damaged. And then next I take the oil fill tube off. It's just two 10mm bolts. It's super easy, and it's just one of those things to where if the chain grabs it and bends it, then I have to find a new one because I don't like the plastic FD one. And then pretty much that's it really for up top right now. I do need to drain the rest of the coolant out of the block. I have drained all of it out of the radiator, which means the level is at least at the top of the radiator. But that last little bit is the most annoying when you pull it out and get coolant absolutely everywhere. And honestly, it's a hazard. I did forget one of the most important steps, and that's the way that my teacher taught me was all the bolts that you take out. If it's the first time that you've done it, go ahead and get out some Ziploc baggies. Label them for the parts that you're taking off. Like there's 5 bolts in the intake manifold. Take those out, label upper intake manifold, put those away, put them in a box somewhere just in case you're not ready to rebuild it immediately or put it back together. Only because like with her car, my wife's car, her FD, we are not putting that thing back together for a while because I want to wait for all of her parts to get in before I even start the project, because I'm just going to do it from start to finish. But if I took her car apart and then threw all of the bolts in just one bag or threw them all over the garage and stuff, putting it back together takes forever. So just a good tip, put them in a plastic baggie so that you don't lose them and you remember which bolts go to where, because the length does matter. Most of the bolts are the same, at least for thread pitch and things like that, and all the sizing is pretty much the same on rotary engines. But the lengths matter. They really matter. The wrong bolt in the wrong place, and you could get almost done, and then the last bolt you're putting in is either too short or way too long, and it's not a good time because the rest of the bolts, you're trying to find which one only has a couple threads in it, or you put that short bolt into something and it strips out the first couple threads, and then you got to find a new bolt. Okay, so next step is going to be the bolts in the bell housing so that we can separate the transmission from the engine, because I leave the transmission in the car when I pull this engine. Put a little support underneath the front of it so that it doesn't hurt the transmission mounts too badly. And then after the bolts in the bell housing, I'm going to go ahead and take the turbo off. It's not necessary. You do not have to do it when you're single turbo, but it makes it a heck of a lot easier to maneuver. And you can see the other engine mount that's below the turbo, so it's a lot easier, especially when you're putting the engine back in to have the turbo off, so that you can see the engine mounts as they go in, so that you make sure you don't have to stab it into the engine bay several times. You can just do it one time in one roll. Okay, last thing for this video is going to be that I took the starter out, the 2 bottom bell housing bolts. I am going to leave the turbo on for now. I'll just take it off when I pull the engine, only because, I mean, honestly, I know where the engine mount is. I know how high to put it. I know exactly like which way to pull it out. This engine is out of the car very often. So next video, what I'm going to do is I'll just do a time lapse of getting the engine out, and then I'll actually do a step-by-step teardown of the way in order of actually how to tear down a 13 BRE. And then maybe in another video or the same video, I'll do a full build of the engine. A lot of the parts are going to be reused. I know most of the side seals are going to be fine. There may be a corner seal or two to replace, but it's nothing going to be crazy because the car honestly has perfect compression. I'm just looking for the pinch coolant seal. I'm hoping that immediately when I pull it apart, it's clear as day to see it. Hopefully it's just really pinched, and then I could just throw some new water seals in it and send it on its way. Probably end up having the housings resurfaced just because I didn't do it last time, but I'll show you guys kind of a step-by-step of how to do that at home, because you can do it. It's not going to be perfect, but if you're on a budget, that's a really easy way to try to make your rebuild last a little bit longer. I did them last time that I took my time and rebuilt the engine, but this one I just kind of slapped together because it was hot outside and I was tired. I shouldn't have done it, but I did do it. So next video, I'll have a teardown for you guys. Thanks for watching. Again, if you guys got any suggestions, tips, or just want to call me an idiot, it's fine. Just in the comments. Let me know what you want to see. If you guys want to see anything specific about the car, or I can do a little bit bigger of an overview on my wife's FD. Thanks, guys.